The buck stops here. If you have a problem with your board of directors, how do you fix board leadership? This is the $64,000 question because it's at the crux of corporate governance. If the board leadership is bad, how can the board function? And if the board can't function, who's watching the store? Today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek, and I'm a big fan of yous. So given the importance of this topic, there's been a lot of ink spilt over it. Solutions have come in a bunch of flavors. Regulatory requirements is one way. Having boards tap a lead director, that's another way. Having a certain percentage of the board be independent. Having key board committees solely comprised of independent directors. These are all solutions that have been used over the years. And then you have pressure on boards from shareholders, from proxy advisors, splitting the board chair position from the CEO position. And sometimes there's just outright shareholder activism, proxy fights, lawsuits with governance by gunpoint settlements. So here are 4 things you should know about board leadership. 1, splitting the CEO and chair doesn't necessarily fix anything. 2, be clear what the roles are. 3, independent chair, lead director accountability is the same as the other directors. And 4, a leader is a leader is a leader. 1, splitting the CEO and chair positions doesn't necessarily solve anything. So there's been, this is one of the big areas of debate in the corporate governance area, I don't know, for 20 years now. And the reality is that there's not much of a difference between the CEO who is a chair and the CEO who is not. There is on paper, and that matters a lot for proxy advisors and some institutional investors. But in practice, you can have a crappy independent chair and vice versa. You might have a crappy CEO chair. Either can work well or either can fail miserably. So studies have shown that it seems to depend on the chemistry as to whether a board functions properly. You know, how strong is the board against a combined CEO chair? How gracious is that CEO chair in working with the board? This is all chemistry, collegiality, people in a room working together. Although causation is hard to prove here, there are no studies out there that show that a split in the positions do lead to improved corporate performance. 2, be clear what the roles are. So whoever is chairing a meeting, regardless of the title, should understand clearly what the role is. What the role is when dealing with management and when dealing with the rest of the board. What the role is when chairing the meeting. There should be a written job description so everyone really knows what's expected. That job description may vary for every single board out there. There's no reason why this needs to be standardized. And it isn't standardized in practice. So it's good for all those involved to know exactly what the role entails and what it doesn't. So if you have a combined CEO chair, it's smart if the board gave separate objectives for each role. The CEO would get paid for the CEO role and would still be accountable for the expectations imposed upon that person for the chair one. And I would revisit that description annually because the board composition is changing. Maybe even whoever is running the meeting, they're changing. Everybody evolves. Everyone changes. And so you have to constantly tinker perhaps with the description for what the relative roles are. And so that things do evolve, but yet everyone's still on the same page. 3, independent chairs, lead directors, accountability, same as the other directors. There's a fallacy that independent chairs, lead directors, committee chairs are somehow more accountable than the other directors. They're not. They all have the same fiduciary duties, each particular director, no matter what their title is. There, I said it. So the roles certainly are different. Some are leaders. They set agendas. They have that power. They lead the way in setting the tone for the board's culture. But accountability, it's the same as any director. 4, a leader is a leader is a leader. So some board leaders might not have a title that indicates that they're a leader. Maybe they're one of those quiet directors who are shrewd at working behind the scenes. See my vid guide about board refreshment and the need to avoid a board full of alphas, hire some quiet introverts that are actually pretty smart. Maybe it's a director who indeed is outspoken at board meetings, someone who is widely respected by the rest of the board. Like any group in life, there just tends to be a natural pecking order. And pretty soon after a new director joins a board, they discover, as well as the rest of the board discovers, where they land in that pecking order. Perhaps their reputation precedes themselves and they are looked upon to be a leader upon their arrival, even though they don't have that title. Or maybe they're a relatively unknown person and they earn their stripes by their uncanny abilities, analytically, level of expertise, or perhaps just through old-fashioned boardroom politics. I'll end this point with a story about J.P. Morgan Chase's CEO, Jamie Dimon, well known. So back in 2005 at our second annual executive compensation conference in my old job, he did an amazing job. He came and spoke. He was a keynote, noting the widespread anger out there about CEO pay and how we all need to get our house in order before Congress does that for us. And he discussed many pay topics at length, displaying an amazing base of knowledge about the topic that I wouldn't think he would know much about. The guy was truly dynamic. But what the key to my story here is that I also had a panel of former CEOs of Fortune 100 companies who are now serving as directors in their retiree life. Guys, and yes, they were all old white men who had been in command. They had big names, large reputations. So I'm sitting there at lunch. We're at a reserved table, just quietly having a nice conversation. And just when we're about done eating, Jamie arrives. His keynote was right after lunch. And he energetically went around the outskirts of the table, shaking each CEO's hand. He knew them all. And you just feel his energy, his presence. And you could feel the deference from all these other former bigwigs toward Jamie. And maybe it was because he was still a CEO, a much younger guy and in the midst of his prime, or maybe it was just because it was Jamie, a force unto himself. But it was wild to watch. There really was a pecking order even among these CEO alpha males. So those are my 4 truths. Perhaps you have more or disagree. Let me know.